February 3rd, 2026, chapter 15.4, definitions of Yo Niso Mana Sikara. Page 1428 to 1438. Buddha Section 4, A Worthy Life, compiled by Somdet Pra Buddha Gosa Acharya, English name P.A. Payuto. Chapter 15.4. The compound terms Yo Niso Mana Sikara is comprised of two words, Yoniso and Mana Sikara. Yoniso is derived from the word Yoni, which means the origin, place of birth, the womb, and is variously translated as the cause, root, source, the wisdom, method, means, and path. Manasikara is translated as mental activity, thinking, consideration, reflection, directing attention, and contemplation. As a compound, the term Yoniso Mana Sikara is traditionally defined as skillful directing attention. The commentaries and sub-commentaries elaborated on the definition and explained the nuances of the term by presenting various synonyms as follows. Upaya Mana Sikara, methodological reflection. To think or to reflect using proper means or methods, systematic thinking. This refers to methodical thinking that enables one to realize and exist in harmony with the truth, and to penetrate the nature and characteristic of all arisen phenomenon. Patha Manasikara means suitable reflection. To think following a distinct course or in a proper way, to think sequentially and in order. To think systematically. This refers to thinking in a well-organized way, in line with causes and effect. To not think in a confused, disorderly way. To not at one moment be preoccupied by one thing and then in the next moment jump to something else, unable to sustain a precise, well-defined sequence of thought. This factor also includes the ability to guide thinking in a correct direction. Karana Manasikara means reason thinking, analytical thinking, investigative thinking, rational thinking. This refers to the inquiry into the relationship and sequence of causes and conditions. To contemplate and search for original causes of things in order to arrive at the root or the source, which is the result in a gradual chain of events. Upadaka Manasikara means effective thinking, to apply thinking in a purposeful way in order to yield desired results. This refers to thinking and reflection that generates wholesome qualities, thoughts and rouse of efforts, an ability to think in a way that dispels fear and danger, and contemplations which support mindfulness and which strengthen and stabilize the mind. Stabilize the mind. The four definitions describe various attributes of the kind of thought referred as Yo Niso Mana Sikara. At any one time, wise reflection may contain all some of these attributes. These four definitions may be summarized in brief: methodological thinking, systematic thinking, analytical thinking, thinking including inducing wholesomeness, It is challenging, however, to come up with a single definition or a translation for just Yoniso Manasikara. More translation could only capture and eliminate nuances of this term, and they're not comprehensive. The alternative is to give a lengthy definition as presented above. The difficulty of translating this term is notwithstanding. There are prominent attributes of the way of thinking which can be used to present all other attributes, or which can be translated in brief. Methodical thinking, skillful thinking, analytical thinking, and investigative thinking. Once one has gained a thorough understanding of this poly term, it is convenient to rely on the concise translation. Wise reflection, systematic reflection, or careful attention. Now, there are many English translations of Yoniso Manasikara. Some of them, literal translation is proper mind work, proper attention, systematic attention, reason attention, attentiveness consideration, reason consideration, considered attention, careful attention, ordered thinking, orderly reasoning, genetical reflection, critical reflection, analytical reflection. Earlier, it was mentioned that the relationship between the internal factor of Yoniso Manasikara and the external factor by paratakosa, by the words of others, and kalalamita, virtuous friendship. So there was two, internal and an external factor. But here we're going to focus more on how the kalalamitra, the virtuous friend, by relying on the principle of sattha, faith, can help people who are unskilled at thinking for themselves and applying Yoniso Manasikara. In the respect to the first three attributes of wise reflection described above, virtuous friends are only able to point out or throw a light on specific truths. But practitioners must contemplate and gain understanding by themselves. When it comes to the stage of true understanding, sattha, faith is inadequate. This is the true meaning of the axiom, atta hi attano nato, meaning one is indeed one's own refuge. Atta hi attano nato, one is indeed one's own refuge. In the regard to these three attributes, sattha, faith is thus extremely limited. In the respect to the fourth attribute, reflection generating wholesome qualities, however, faith plays a powerful role. Some people are weak and easily daunted or thinking in irrational and harmful ways. If a virtuous friend is able to establish faith in such people, this will be very helpful for them. He or she may inspire and encourage them by using skillful means. Having said thus, there are people who are naturally endowed with Yoniso Manasikara, wise reflection, and are able to think for themselves. In discouraging or distressing situations, they are able to effectively motivate themselves and think of ways to address the problems. On the contrary, if one has evil friends or applies unwise attention despite finding oneself in good circumstances and encountering good things, one is likely to think or act in bad ways. For instance, when discovering a pleasant, secluded place, a bad person may think of it as a suitable place to commit a crime. In a similar vein, some people are highly suspicious when they see something else or see someone else smile. They think that they are being ridiculed or insulted. If one allows this course of thinking to proceed unimpeded, unwise attention would nourish and strengthen such unwholesome states of mind. A person who habitually sees things in a negative light will bring to see others as adversaries. Similarly, a person who is habitually afraid and see others as thinking ill of him may develop a mental disorder of paranoia. Depending on either wise reflection or unwise reflection, the same subject matter may result in a very different behavior for different people. One person may think of death with improper attention and consequently experience fear, experience depression, apathy, and confusion. Another person may think of death with wise reflection and thus appreciate the need to abstain from unwholesome actions. He or she will be calm, heedful, ardent, hasten to perform good deeds. In terms of insight into reality, yoniso manasikara, wise reflection, is not wisdom itself, but rather a condition for the arising of wisdom. That is, yoniso manasikara, wise reflection, generates samatiti, right view. The Mi Lingda Pa describes the difference between the reflection and wisdom thus. First, animals such as goats, sheep, cows, buffaloes, camels, and donkeys possess a forms of reflection, manasikara, mental application, but they do not possess wisdom, nor the reflection analytical. Second, manasikara has the characteristics of contemplation and reflection, whereas panya, wisdom, has the characteristics of serving. Manasikara gathers together and submit ideas to wisdom, which is then able to eliminate mental defilements. Similar to a man grasping an ear of rice by his left hand, enabling him to successfully harvest it with a sickle held in his right hand. Based on this interpretation, yoniso manasikara is the kind of mental engagement, manasikara, leading to the application of development of wisdom. The Bhapa Sutani Sutra states that ayoniso manasika, unwise attention, is the root of the round of rebirth, samsaravata, causing beings to accumulate problems and to swim around in dukkha, suffering. This text also explains that when it is allowed to prosper, unwise attention increases, both avijja, ignorance, and tanha, for becoming, bhava tanha exclusively. With the arising of ignorance, the cycle of patisammupata, dependent origination, begins, starting with avijja, ignorance, acting as the condition for sankhara, volitional formations. The completed and the arisen of whole mass of dukkha, suffering. The beginning of the cycle of patisammupata, dependent origination, can also be described by the arisen of tanha, craving, starting with craving acting as the condition for upatana, grasping, and similarly completed with the mass of dukkha. Conversely, yoniso manasikara is the root, the cause for the cycle of turning away, vivata, enabling one to escape from the whirlpool of dukkha, suffering, and truly solve problems. With the arising of yoniso manasikara, a person begins to practice according to the Eightfold Path, with samatiti, right view, as the leading factor. Samatiti, right view, here is equivalent to vijja, true knowledge. With the arisen of true knowledge, ignorance ceases. With the end of ignorance, the cessation cycle, nirotavata, of the patisammupata, dependent origination, is set in operation, leading gradually to the cessation of dukkha, of suffering. These processes is like the round of rebirth. then unwise reflection, then comes ignorance. From ignorance, we move to volitional formation, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, the arising of suffering. Then we have craving. Then we hold on to it with grasping, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, the arising of suffering. But the cycle of turning away from it by using wise reflection, cultivating on the path to having right view, true knowledge, the cessation of ignorance, the cessation of volitional formations, and the cessation, ultimately, of suffering. The term yoniso manasikara has a wide range of thinking, of meaning, including thinking concerned with moral issues and thinking in line with virtuous and truthful principles which has been studied and understood. Basic levels of contemplation which do not require a profound degree of wisdom include thoughts of impeccability, thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of generosity and assistance, thoughts of generating inner strength, determination, and courage. Some contemplations, however, require refined, subtle degrees of wisdom. An analysis of subsidiary factors or an investigation into causes and conditions. Because the meaning of wise reflection is so comprehensive, everyone is capable of applying it, especially elementary levels of contemplation. All people need to do is direct their course of thinking in a wholesome direction, corresponding to the teachings they have received and the ideas they have nurtured. These basic forms of wise reflection help to generate conscious, mundane, right view, and is generally influenced by sattva, faith, which comes through the words of parakosa, the words of others, including one's education, one's culture, and the presence of virtuous friends. Sattva, faith, acts as the anchor for the mind and the internal force. When a person cognizes a sense object and encounters a particular situation, the course of his or her thinking is directed by the force of sattva, faith, as if faith has already dug a channel for the thinking to go. For this reason, the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, stated that the correct faith is nourished by yoniso manasikara, wise reflection. External instruction from virtuous friends, which uses faith as a channel, is able to gradually increase understanding and introduce a person to new ideas by way of consultations and by asking questions to clear up doubts. When it is applied repeatedly, nourished by faith, proper reflection develops and becomes more agile, deepening wisdom. Panya, development. When one contemplates and sees that the teaching one has received is truly correct and beneficial, one becomes more confident and faith increases. In this way, yoniso manasikara enhances faith. It urges people to make greater effort into their studies until eventually their own reflections lead them to the realization and deliverance. Here, a person's spiritual practice relies on the integration between internal and external factors. So it relies on parata, gosa, and akarara mitra, the internal and external factors, the environment, wholesome influence from external sources is implied in the phrase, be your own refuge, with no one else as your refuge. Gautama Buddha, the Gautama Buddha did not reject external forces. Indeed, external influences and the quality of faith are extremely important. But the key determining factor lies within. That is yoniso manasikara, wise reflection. The more one is able to apply yoniso manasikara, the less one relies on external factors. Similarly, if someone does not apply wise reflection at all, any amount of help with virtuous friend is in vain. At most students of Buddhism No mindfulness is the vital factor that is required for every activity. The problem arises, however, of how to establish mindfulness in time. And once it is established, how to sustain it in a consistent, continuous way so that it's not broken and does not slip away. In this context, there are teaching which explains how wise reflection nourishes mindfulness, assisting the establishment and the uninterrupted flow of mindfulness. If one possesses systematic, coherent, and effective reflection, one is able to sustain mindfulness consistently. If one is unable to reflect properly, however, if one thinking is ineffectual or aimless, mindfulness will keep slipping away. One will be unable to sustain it. It is neither correct nor possible to truly compel or constrain mindfulness. The correct course is to nourish mindfulness and to generate its supportive conditions. If these conditions are present, mindfulness arises. This is the part of the natural process. One thus need to act in accord with this process. The function of yoniso manasikara is to cut off ignorance and craving, and is an affirmative sense. It summons wisdom and wholesome qualities. Speaking in general, when a person encounters a sense object, the process of thinking begins immediately. At this point, two distinct forces vie with one another. If ignorance and craving are able to seize control of thinking, the thought process will be subject to these factors and shaped by mental formation based on likes and dislikes and based on pre-established concepts and ideas. If wise reflection, however, is able to bar and cut off ignorance and craving, it will lead thinking in a correct direction, resulting in a thought process free from these negative factors. The corrupted thought process is replaced by the process of knowing and seeing, nana dasana, and of true knowledge of liberation, vijja vimutti. Speaking in general, when ordinary unawakened beings encounter a sense object, their thinking follows the course of ignorance and craving. They overlay the experience with the likes and dislikes or with pre-established ideas. This is the point at which thoughts connected to that experience or sense object begin to the shape and molded by ignorance and craving, a process which occurs because the person accumulated habitual tendencies. To be influenced by ignorance and craving in one's thinking is to see things that one wants them to be or not to be. One's thinking is bound by personal attachment and aversion. This results in the incorrect discernment of things. In prejudices based on preferences and aversions is in misunderstanding and distorted preconceptions. Moreover, nevertheless, and in addition to, it is the cause for confusion, listlessness, loneliness, despondency, fear, gratification, and subsequent disappointment, stress, frustration, all of which are various forms of mental affliction. Reflecting wisely entails seeing this according to the truth or according to the causal relationship, not according to ignorance and craving. In other words, one sees things according to their own nature, not according to one's wishes and desires. When an unawakened person experiences something, their thoughts immediately align themselves with likes and dislikes. The function of wise reflection is to cut off this process and seize the active role. It then directs the course of thinking in a pure systematic direction, a contemplative according to the causes and conditions. The result is that one understands the truth and generates wholesome states, or that at the very least one responds to things the most appropriate way. Yoniso manasikara allows people to make good use of thinking, to be a master of their own thoughts, to call upon thinking in order to solve problems and to live at ease. This is the opposite to unwise reflection, which allows our thoughts to manipulate, enslave the mind, to drag people into difficulty, oppress them in various ways, and take away their independence. It is noteworthy also that in the course of wise reflection, sati, mindfulness, clear comprehensions are the factors inherent in the process, because wise reflection constantly nourishes these factors. To sum all this up, Yoniso Manasikara cuts off ignorance and craving. The two negative qualities always appear together in tandem at the same time. Although in some cases, ignorance is prominent and craving is unpronounced, while other times, craving is dominant and ignorance is concealed. Given this fact, it is possible for the present two definitions for wise reflection according to the dominant role of either ignorance or craving. Wise reflection is a form of thinking that cuts off ignorance. It is a form of thinking that cuts off craving. This distinction is as follows. When ignorance is dominant, thinking gets stuck and revolves around a single theme in a confused and disconnected way. One does not know which direction to go, or else one's thoughts are incoherent, distorted, irrational. Take the example in the case of someone who is caught in fear, false evidence appearing real. When craving is dominant, thinking inclines the direction of likes and dislikes, preferences and aversions, or attachment to revulsion. One is preoccupied with those things one likes or dislikes. One's thinking is shaped in accord with pleasure and displeasure. Now, this distinction is notwithstanding. On a profound level, ignorance is the source of craving, and craving reinforces ignorance. Therefore, if one is to eliminate all affliction and unwholesomeness completely, one must go to the source and eliminate ignorance. The end of chapter 15.4, Buddha Dhamma.